Welcome back to the KRUSE Elite Podcast. What's up, Tony?
Good morning, Taylor. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
That's going to seem random. When's the last time you've been on a trampoline?
Well, actually, not that long ago, because
Really?
not currently, but not in the past maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but most Fridays are actually gymnastics days for my 5-year-old.
Okay.
And my wife and I will alternate who takes her over there. And so, I got to get on the equipment myself. I'm on a trampoline once in a while, just kind of playing around and teaching my daughter how to navigate what is a very dangerous piece of equipment when you're 5.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can just go flying. So I recently was visiting our mutual friend, Jordan, and he has a trampoline in the backyard.
Sure.
And we got on there. Man, I was not, how do I put this? It had been so long since I'd been on a trampoline.
Right.
I just wasn't prepared for how it was going to feel.
Yeah.
And, it kind of felt like my knees were almost jelly for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the hang of it and you're kind of moving with the up and down. And then when you get off, all of a sudden it felt like my legs were like lead because there was no bounce whatsoever. And my body had already gotten used to just that extreme rebound, right?
Did you have the sensory mismatch when you got off at all? Did you get on hard ground and go, whoa?
Yeah, it's like getting off the treadmill. It's like getting off the treadmill after a long time and all of a sudden walking on normal ground just feels wrong. It was like that.
Yeah, that's sensory mismatch. That's
okay.
Yeah, that's an example of a kind of sensory mismatch.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, where you adapt to a certain, environment or piece of equipment. Same thing happens when you're on a boat for the day.
Right.
I've been on. I don't go on boats very often, and on occasion, I'll go fly fishing or something in the salt water and be on a boat for a day, and then I get off the boat and I'm like, whoa! It's like walking feels strange, like I'm still rocking on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same idea.
I've heard of that. Some people don't get seasick; they get land sick. They get it when they get back, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, but tramps they can be tough. Especially when you're not used to it.
I was thinking, if you just did that every day a little bit, it's good for cardio. Your heart rate goes up. There's obviously a lot of circulation going on, but also it's how often are people really jumping and not even just jumping, but that shock absorption, even though it's a trampoline, when you're landing, you're
absorbing a lot.
You're absorbing a lot of that energy. I feel like that would be a nice novel stimulus for a lot of people.
It is, but then it's also there's sort of there's two sides of it, right? There's the novel stimulus, which is good. There's the fact that it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very strong vestibular stimulus in some cases, depending on how you're jumping. And, you get a new movement experience, right? Where you're going higher than you have before. And, it's fun to play around with different tricks and stuff. Certainly value, in those departments. But as a training stimulus, if you're trying to get more serious about a training stimulus, it is a completely non-specific environment, almost like an unstable surface, So it just kind of, I guess it just depends, it just depends on what you want to do. I have chose a trampoline in the past as a training stimulus for some of the alpine ski racers that I worked with.
Okay.
In some real specific ways, because there's a way to jump on a trampoline. There's kind of two basic ways. You can jump on a trampoline and you can allow your body all that vertical movement where your head is actually moving through space with your body, right? That verticality as you bounce. But then there's another way to jump on a trampoline where your lower body is active as you put force into the trampoline and the trampoline puts force back in you, but you stop your verticality and your head stays in place.
Yep.
Very unique thing that is very difficult to replicate on land. Sure, you can do it. but it's more difficult. And so with some of the ski racers I've worked with in the past, I had set up certain training drills for that reason, because they often have to get good at moving their body under their head very quickly without changing levels. Yeah, so it's kind of unique in that way. So yeah, it just kind of depends on how you want to use it. Maybe we'll maybe it'll come up in our conversation today, actually.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because well, we're talking about the lymphatic system, and some of the marketing and stuff out there says jump on a trampoline for the lymphatics, and buy a rebounder,
Interesting.
and yeah, that's
Yeah.
one of the things you hear anyway.
So I was wondering, is there any like neural pathway for like shock absorption? Because I feel like that's kind of a unique.
Yeah, it's not an isolated thing, but when you say shock absorption, several things come to mind.
Hmm.
So you have to have a good vestibular system. Okay, and your vestibular system is some of your main descending postural control during movement. So a difficulty, like a problem in the vestibular system or deconditioning in the vestibular system, will make jumping and landing more difficult. There's no question. So shock absorption and putting force into the ground might be harder for somebody that has vestibular challenges. I also think about the cerebellum because of the accuracy and kind of fine tuning that has to happen proprioceptively when you're striking the ground very precisely, putting force into it, receiving energy back from the ground, and absorbing force, transferring force. The cerebellum is going to be a system that we would think about for the accuracy of that and balance and the coordination of that.
Hmm.
And I think about tendons, a
Right.
lot, how well your tendons can absorb force and act like the shocks that they're supposed to be. Thinking about deep tendon reflexes, the reflex arc with the spinal cord. This is actually something that I'm very it's fascinating to me because there's actually like a movement happening, I think anyways, in the health and fitness world where people are talking a lot about tendons,
Yeah.
talking about connective tissue and the transfer of force and plyometrics and all that stuff. But I've never heard anyone talk about tendon reflexes. Like never. And it's so interesting to me because it's literally a built-in shock absorber for us, and your tendons have to that reflex, I should say, has to work properly. And sometimes the tendons aren't responding the way they need to, especially with people that have had spinal cord injuries in their history. Sometimes those tendon reflexes are not working appropriately, or different problems, even at the cerebellar level, can cause accuracy issues with how the tendon is responding to impact. So there's a lot there, but those are things that come to mind with shock absorption. And midline stability is a huge one, right? And we could talk about midline stability. So there's so many things that go into that, but if your midline is not stable, then producing force, putting force into the ground, or receiving force is unbelievably difficult you
Hmm.
know
So on the flip side, I guess you could make an argument that trampoline, like getting on a trampoline, could be vestibular training, it could be cerebellar training, it could help with kind of getting those signals to and from the brain if it's something you haven't done much of.
Yes, but I look at it as a manipulation and using a tool to achieve a goal that you might feel is necessary now, but it's a non-specific stimulus to the rest of what we're doing in life. So sometimes we make training decisions knowing that it's not ideal for possibly transferring as well as something else could.
Sure. Like
But
water
we're
training or
totally.
even
Yep.
like compression band stuff, where it's
Yeah,
like you're
there's
not going to have that forever.
right, right. So sometimes we make training decisions where like, okay, let's see how much we can squeeze out of this right now for this goal. And it's probably something we're going to graduate from, but we're using it for a reason. Like you said, when I did a lot more aquatic exercise work with people, the
Hmm.
water is non-specific. I mean, and it's that the buoyancy that's involved in the water is totally non-specific to how we control our body when we're on land, fighting gravity. But we made training decisions to use the medium of water for specific reasons, and it can be a small percentage of what you're doing. It can be something you graduate from, but yeah, sometimes those non-specific tools can offer us something. So yeah, you could make the argument, and then there's just like the fun factor, and the exposure. People say to me all the time, "Hey, you said don't use unstable surfaces for balance training." It's like, well, I probably at some point used to be more extreme about that. My statement probably sounded more extreme. Now I'm just kind of like, well, there's a better way to do it if balance is your goal,
Yeah.
but the fun factor is okay too. You can still use unstable surfaces, and it's exposure to a unique training stimulus. But again, like we have to know and be aware of how effective is it? How much can we expect to gain from it? When is it appropriate to graduate from it?
So this is our episode on trampolines.
Yeah.
But our actual episode topic, like you alluded to earlier, is about the lymphatic system.
Right. This has been on tap for a while. We just haven't made it to
Yeah, I've
this. Yeah.
been I've been agitating for this for a minute, and the reason why I really wanted to talk about this was I got sick. I don't know if it was like a year ago or something, and I was telling you, I was like, man, like my calves got real tight, and
Yeah.
like I feel better, but like my calves are super tight, and that's like they're almost like sore. And I
Right.
was just like, this is new and different for me from getting sick. And you're like, hey man, you know what you should try? And you sent me a video
Hmm.
of like a lymphatic drainage technique.
Right. Right.
And it was just something I had never even thought about or considered before. I guess the only thing I really knew about like the lymph nodes and stuff was, like right under the like corner of your jaw, like up
Yeah.
almost by on your neck towards your ear. There's like I don't
Y-
know, like a little ball in there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets inflamed, right? Like sometimes you can feel it or
Yeah.
see it more.
That's right. That's a cluster of lymph nodes.
There you go. And
Yeah.
so I'd known about that, and I'd actually like massaged those before in the
Hmm.
past, but I had never really thought about like, oh, this is increasing drainage or anything really. And so
Yeah.
I know this might be adjacent to applied neurology, but you seem to know something about this, and I thought it'd be really cool to explore this because it does seem like a technique that you have embraced and use in your own,
For
in
sure.
your own life, right?
Yeah. For sure. It's an interesting conversation and topic. Something I feel like I'm learning about a little bit at a time, all the time. It's actually really gaining a lot of popularity too.
Mm,
People are talking more about it. It used to be that nobody talked about it beyond what you just said. Like, hey, you got a cold? Oh, they feel swollen.
hmm.
You do have a cold. Your body's working hard against that cold. And, most people anyway have had that experience where they feel underneath the line of the corner of their jaw, and they feel the swelling that can take place there. And there's lymph nodes all over the body that are involved in some interesting processes. So maybe we start with kind of a basic rundown of what the lymph system is,
Sure.
and what it does for us. And hopefully we'll find our way right into some application, some practical things, actually, some very easy things to execute that can be quite useful for working with lymphatics. So I guess the first thing, this might be completely new for some of our listeners, is to hear about the lymphatic system. So First thing that you want to know about lymphatics is that it is part of the circulatory system. And essentially, the lymphatic system returns excess fluid back into circulation. So, in other words, it helps with swelling. So, when you have an acute injury, and let's say you sprain your ankle and your ankle swells up like a baseball, eventually your body's able to do something with that fluid, right? And it's your lymph system that is very much responding to the inflammation, and over time, helping to move the excess fluid there. So it's primarily, like, you can think about it as like a plumbing system or like a sewer system for the body, right? And it's think about it like a sewer system is actually it's a good way to look at it, because one of the other things that's so important is that the lymph system helps to aid in immune function and the destruction of waste and debris and infectious agents and even cancer cells. Right? So it's the plumbing system that's helping to get the bad guys out, basically. Lymph is filtered through lymph nodes. It's filtered through vessels and other lymphatic organs as it flows back towards re-entry into the venous system. So it's working with the circulatory system. You can't separate it from blood, basically,
Okay.
right? Yeah. It goes through this filtering process that hopefully, if the process is working well, it kills and removes the bad guys, the pathogens and debris. And here's an interesting one. The lymph system helps to absorb and transport fats and fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, which is just, an interesting thing to know about it.
Yeah.
And it brings up some, thoughts or questions about people that have difficulty with their lymph system, who might also be seeing deficiencies in vitamins. Yeah, in these fat soluble vitamins. So, as far as the anatomy goes, so we've got lymph fluid, okay? And then we have lymph vessels that are very close to the surface of the skin. So, what I would encourage our listeners to do is just quickly Google up a picture of the lymphatic system. And you'll get a head to toe image that usually has green lines all over it, almost like the green lines look like nerves or meridian pathways, however you want to think about it, but they're everywhere, right? And so you can really see like how global the lymph system is. Those green lines are the vessels, right? And they're really close to the skin. So, most of the lymphatic system is very close to the dermal layer of skin, which is good to know because a lot of the manual therapies or manual techniques that we might use to help mobilize the lymph system, well, the lymph system is incredibly accessible because you don't have to go digging very deep in order to affect it, which is nice. Those vessels are close to the surface of the skin. So we've got those vessels. We've got lymph nodes, like you described, around the cervical area, corner of the jaw. That's a lymph node area. There are clusters. There are areas around the whole body that have high concentrations of these clusters of lymph nodes. So another place where you might be able to easily palpate them is actually in your hip creases, like the groin crease, over like the inguinal ligament. And so kind of where if you like feel around in your hip creases where things are pretty bony and you can, with your fingertips kind of pressing into your groin crease, there's not a lot of like, protective tissue there, right? You immediately start, rolling over all sorts of anatomy. And if you feel around, eventually what you're going to feel are lymph nodes, right? Again, those kind of little circular shaped, nodes in there that feel like a little kidney bean or something, if you know what I mean. And beyond that, we also have lymph organs. So we have, major organs like the ones that are talked about a lot in relation to the lymphatic system is the thymus and the spleen, and those organs are very much involved in this filtering of blood, and they also help to create white blood cells, in their filtering process, which also aid in our immune function. So, yeah, lots of interesting little key things about anatomy. And to keep it super simple, think about it as the sewer system. And we want to make sure that that plumbing is working efficiently. We want to make sure that it's not clogged or becomes stagnant, which it can. The lymphatic system has an optimal functioning, and sometimes it can become stagnant. Sometimes that stagnation is related to local factors where we might need to figure out where a stagnant area is and do something about it. Other times, the whole lymphatic system globally can actually become stagnant from different states of our health and body that can occur. So we'll probably talk about some of that stuff and at some point here as we get into why work on the lymph system and how.
Mm-hmm. Immediately, like two kind of neuro things come to mind, right? If we're at the dermal layer,
Mm-hmm.
we know that there's other receptors at that level.
Yes.
And so I wonder if beyond just like physically, like almost like pushing the fluids in the lymph system, manually, beyond that, if there's a neurological stimulus that might help activate the lymph system. I don't know. I'm asking. And then,
Yep.
well, let's start there. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing about lymph, lymph fluid. All movement is designed to affect it, right? So it's very, as we start to like become educated on the lymph system, right? Humans have this amazing ability to reverse engineer things and isolate things down to such a level that we start feeling like the lymph system is just one system. It doesn't interact with other systems, and
Right.
that's not the case. It's interacting with everything. It is not separate from the nervous system per se, and like I said, it's not separate from your blood. So it's kind of human nature to start to think about it in such an isolated way where we think that certain things or only certain things can help to mobilize it, when the fact is there's so many things that have the ability to affect it. So anytime you touch the body or a stimulus touches you, there's going to be a lot of neurologic factors there in terms of sensing it and activating receptors as you're talking about. But the touch itself, anytime you touch the body with a reasonable amount of pressure, you're creating pressure differential in the body. And it's important to know that, because it means that any stimulus has the ability, any tactile stimulus has the ability to affect lymph.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime we press on the body, anytime we use things like kinesio tape is actually one of the tools that can be used to affect the lymph system. Again,
Mm-hmm.
because we're putting something on the skin, we're moving the skin, maybe combining that with movement, of some kind, and that's going to create pressure differential in the body, and the whole body technically responds to a localized pressure differential. And that's why going like deeper into the lymph system, the other thing our listeners can kind of Google up here is a map of lymphatic drainage, because you can actually get pretty familiar with the direction of drainage and even side to side differences with like global drainage, which I'm sure we'll talk about actually, because it is an important detail when you're starting to use tactile techniques that mobilize the lymph system. Knowing where to do that matters, because the way things are designed is that touching certain areas have the ability to impact, either the right side of the body or the left side of the body. So we'll probably cover that. So there's so many things that affect it. All movement, all touch, breathing is a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that makes sense, right? By design.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, you mentioned it's tied to the blood, blood system, cardiovascular
Right.
system, right? So I was even just thinking like getting some cardio in
Oh,
might
that's
might mobilize
top of
stuff,
my
right?
list.
Okay.
Top of my
Okay.
list on techniques. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
let's run through them.
Yeah. So there's some that come to mind sooner than other things. So top of the list is cardiovascular exercise. I typically like to do this in more of a CO2 tolerance way. So also breathing. But people have heard me talk about this a lot now. Nasal breathing cardiovascular exercise,
Mm-hmm.
where you're exerting yourself in some way, could be walking, running, hiking, cycling, any cardio really exercise that you want, and you are focusing on only breathing through your nose, and you're letting the nasal breathing or your ability to sustain nasal breathing set the intensity for what you're doing. So, in other words, if you work too hard and your heart rate goes up too high, you likely won't be able to sustain breathing through your nose. And so you'll have to either stop, take a break, or shift to mouth breathing. And so the nasal breathing sets the intensity, which usually it sets it rather moderate to low.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really great technique to help mobilize the lymph system. You have movement, which if we're going to mobilize the lymph system, movement is a big deal, right? Because movement will do it. We have breathing. The combination of breathing and movement is really a prerequisite for good mobilization of the lymph system. So when we're exercising with cardio, we've got both of those things. Breathing through the nose, and of course your heart rate is elevated as you're doing that. The nasal breathing is excellent for building up CO2, and CO2 is one of the things that helps to basically bring oxygen to our body's tissues. And so that's one of the reasons why nasal breathing exercises is so useful for generating global circulation. So yeah, it's a low hanging fruit. I'll tell you that for
Mm-hmm.
so many reasons. It's a really healthy thing to do. And on the topic of lymphatics, we spend a lot of time talking about nasal breathing for increasing fuel capacity. And a lot of that time we don't bring up the
Right.
lymphatic conversation, but it's quite helpful.
Yeah.
So that was kind of two there. We had the CO2 tolerance work, which can be achieved in other ways too. It doesn't have to be cardiovascular exercise. I think all CO2 tolerance work where you are reducing your rate of breathing, and maybe even, this gets counterintuitive, maybe even not breathing and doing some air hunger exercise where you're moving, but you're purposely not breathing. And again, you build up that air hunger, that sensation, that desire to breathe, and that will elevate CO2 levels too. So combining the either reduced breathing, where you're breathing slower on purpose, combining that with movement, or combining air hunger with movement,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those things are great. So like air hunger squats is an exercise we use a lot where you exhale, hold your breath, squat as many times as you can. Then when you have the desire to breathe, you resume breathing, but you do it through your nose and you do it slowly and calmly. And then you repeat bouts of this. That would be an air hunger exercise. You could do that with anything. Could be walking, could be running. And you can also reduce the rate of your breathing. So a little bit more gentle, if you will. Perhaps you are doing what we call box breathing, where as you're out for a walk, you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then resume the same pattern. And it doesn't have to be 4 seconds, but that's usually where we start people. You can increase the number of seconds, and of course, the air hunger becomes more intense. But something like box breathing is a reduced breathing exercise. There's lots of different kinds that you could play around with, and combining that out, on your walk, right, for a few minutes. Well, we've got breathing, we've got movement, so we've got mobilization of lymph.
Yeah.
And with walking too, it's funny because I get questions quite a bit about buying different things that claim lymphatic drainage. One of the things we mentioned briefly was like the trampoline, or they call it a rebounder.
Mm-hmm.
So small trampoline usually has a handle on it that you can put your hands on, and then you can bounce. And then the other one that I get asked about is the vibration plate, which is the one probably most popular right now, where you stand or sit on a vibration plate and it literally vibrates pretty aggressively, and you get that vibratory stimulus through your whole body, head to toe. It's certainly a trend right now. All the influencers are talking about it. And people ask me, should I get this for my lymph system? And I'm like, well, you could. Does it mobilize lymph? Well, yes, but that's because there's movement involved,
Mm.
right? Well, what about trampoline? Does that mobilize lymph? Well, yes, that's because there's movement involved. Oh, okay. So what would you suggest? Do you want to do it for free? Go for a walk. So it's kind of all built in by design, if you know what I mean. And the interesting thing about walking is that you get the gastroc activation, so in your calf muscles, and your calf muscles are actually one of the built-in mechanisms that help to drive fluids back up towards the lymph areas in the inguinal crease, in the hip crease, right?
So when I was complaining about like my calves being sore, and it was really weird because I hadn't done any physical activity, I had just gotten sick and just been in
Yeah.
bed for 3 days. You immediately were like, "Hey, consider this lymph stuff."
hmm
Is that because like the calves specifically were cluing you in on that, or?
Yeah, well, I immediately thought, well, you feel soreness without having exercised.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself is usually indicative of some kind of stagnation
Mm-hmm.
in the body, right? Because your certain body areas will actually become tender, sore to the touch, or you'll feel it as soreness when the lymph system is, call it, we're calling it like stagnation, right? It's maybe not moving fluids as efficiently, or maybe it is, but it's working hard,
It can't
right?
keep up, maybe, for
Yeah,
example.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so sometimes when we feel global stiffness or soreness, but we don't have a way to describe why it would be there because of like exercise, sometimes that's when your lymph system is working hard, right? And with you, when you said, yeah, my calves, it's like, well, yeah, okay, so perhaps some lymph work would be good there. I mean, it could be as simple as making sure you get outside, get sunlight, get walking combination movement and breathing, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. Your lymph system works by design. I guess I should say, until it doesn't. And
Right.
there's actually, because you can have more significant blockage for very specific health related reasons,
Right.
So different from like you when you have a cold, when you had a cold, or like I have a cold right now, and I do have a little tenderness in my body, even though last time I exercised was 2 days ago. I didn't really do too much because I was still not quite back, and I am a little bit sore, probably more so than I should be. And that's kind of that acute response that maybe we can counter with the right movement and breathing. Pretty easy, right?
So I was going to just mention, all of this reminds me of the same stuff you might do when you're in like recovery mode from heavy training.
Yeah, it can be a useful recovery tool. Usually with recovery, I'm typically not. I'm not leaning on this that much unless I think the athlete I'm working with has a recovery problem,
Mm-hmm.
or the person that I'm working with has a recovery problem, and some people do.
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you can lean on lymphatic techniques to help recover.
Or even just going for a walk, or you know what I mean? Like I feel like circulation is good when you have DOMs and that kind of thing, right? It's like
Yes.
helpful to kind of flush that out.
Yes. And I should say, kind of going back to this idea where you can have like an acute situation, like having a cold or something. And then you can have something that becomes more chronic, stagnation that presents itself because of an injury of some kind. So, or even the state of the nervous system. So, a couple of interesting ideas. You could have stagnation in the lymph system because of a past injury or surgery. So, and location is very important here because of where these nodes are and the direction that fluids are flowing. All of that can be thrown off. Pressure can be thrown off. Blood flow to certain areas of the body can be thrown off by injury and past surgery. And I'll give you a pretty relatable one, relatable for a lot of women, would be having had a C-section, right? That is a insult to the skin and underlying tissues in the middle of the body. And if you've had multiple C-sections, which is becoming quite common, basically you could develop, vascular type issues in that area where, blood flow issues in that area, and where you get sliced basically is very close to several different lymph node areas. So it's quite close to the ones we mentioned in the inguinal creases. There's also a deeper lymphatic area in the abdomen. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it right, so don't quote me, but cisterna chyli, I think,
Okay.
is the lymph area in the abdomen, which is deeper than what we were talking about with, say, the cervical nodes or the inguinal ones.
So maybe harder to get to from the manual massage, right?
Harder to get to, but you can do it.
Okay.
You can do it. And that's the thing about the lymph system is it's responsive to all the dermal layer stuff. Yeah, it's for sure. So that's what makes it unique and quite easy to work with. But something like a C-section scar or any kind of abdominal scar in that area can throw off fluid dynamics and how fluids are moving, because scar tissue can restrict blood flow
Mm-hmm.
basically. And you can develop movement issues over time, whether it's being deconditioned or having had some sort of injury or scar, and your connective tissues and scar tissue is forming, and you have fascial winding that takes place over a longer period of time when your body is compensating in a certain way. All of that eventually can cause, or at least be part of, these different blood flow issues that people might encounter. So again, the location matters. There's other lymph node areas that are susceptible to scarring, would be up like around the armpit. So up basically in your armpit, kind of underneath, like if you were to dig around underneath, like around the pec minor area. People sometimes when they get sick actually can feel in their armpit that they have some swelling or tenderness. That area is quite susceptible when there's been some kind of injury in the chest area, or around the clavicles. Yeah, so there can be location, reasons and injury reasons that create stagnation. And the more systemic one that I was referring to with the nervous system is one I think about a lot, more than what I just described actually, because it has to do more with sympathetics. So an easy way to describe this is somebody that is going through a lot of sympathetic arousal all the time, right? We know that we don't want that. You don't want elevated sympathetics all the time, because that's no fun. That means you are essentially a walking fight or flight nervous system. So your nervous system is, if you're kind of stuck in fight or flight, you're nervous system is producing survival-based behaviors and responses constantly. You don't want that, right? We want to be able to shift out of that when it's appropriate, mealtime, digesting, sleeping, relaxing, enjoying an activity, friends, loved ones, whatever it is. You want your state to be able to downregulate, have a little bit more balance with your parasympathetics, right? So that you're not stuck in that fight or flight. And the idea of getting stuck in fight or flight can happen for lots of different reasons. It can be injury, certain, types of trauma. It can be upbringing. It can be all sorts of things, right? Your behavior over time, stressful factors, environmental factors, dysfunctional breathing patterns for years, right? I mean, so many different things, right? Nutritional deficits, right, can drive it. And here's the key takeaway. When you're kind of under the dominance of fight or flight all the time, or your sympathetics are elevated, your sympathetics, or I should say your high sympathetic tone, equals vasoconstriction of the lymphatic vessels. Okay. So, in other words, the constriction of the vessels that are involved in moving lymph.
Yeah.
And so, if you think about that, if you yourself or somebody that is very elevated with their sympathetics, those same people usually describe having like global chronic tension, tension in the neck, tension in the shoulders, tension in the jaw, tension under their arms, maybe tension in their hips. Usually they're talking about bilateral tension. So it's not like a one-sided thing usually, right? It's usually bilateral. And they run tight a lot of the times. Not all the time, but most of these people run tight. They're a little bit more, they present with what we would just say is tighter tissue, basically. And in that tight tissue from having elevated sympathetics, because with elevated sympathetics, we see an increase in tension in the body by design, right? That's how it works. That tight tissue makes it so that those body tissues do not receive blood flow as efficiently. Chronically over time is what I'm talking about. Chronically over time. So this is taking place over a long period of time. If you are very sympathetic, you typically run into blood flow issues, which causes more tightness, right? It makes muscles feel more tight, much more tighter. And so anyways, the point being, it's the constriction part, right? Sympathetics become elevated for a long time under the dominance of fight or flight. We see the vasoconstriction on the lymph vessels, and that in itself can lead to somebody who does not have a lymphatic system that operates, let's just say, optimally for them.
So parasympathetic activation may be helpful at kind of a global level to just help with.
Yes, great. It's a great comment. Like vagal type things, vagal type drills, parasympathetic kinds of drills actually are a very nice addition to any of the lymphatic work that a person might do.
Yeah.
That can be
a lot
useful.
Of sense.
Yeah, activating the vagus nerve, which is highly involved in your immune function as well. Yeah, so it's a good thing to add. So I'm looking at my bullets here where we were talking about techniques, and we had talked about the CO2 tolerance, the cardiovascular exercise. Here's another interesting one to consider, and it's cool because we talk a lot about joint mobility, but we talk about joint mobility in the sense of, training proprioception, using it as a tool to train the cerebellum, things like that. We have not yet talked about joint mobility as a tool for thinking about mobilizing the lymphatic system. So this is kind of a neat one because, again, it's movement, right? And if we know where to move, we can affect the lymph system in a more productive way. In fact, there's even an order that tends to kind of an order of operations that tends to be the most powerful in terms of promoting more movement of fluids. So we can kind of quickly go through that order. So we've got a place to, like a starting place with lymph mobilization if you're going to do any kind of tactile work, or as I'm about to describe, joint mobility work. You would start up around just above the collarbones. Okay, so that's kind of site number one. And then from there, after doing some work above the clavicle, you would move up to the cervical region, but up near the corner of the jaw, and a little bit back towards almost like the earlobes. That would be kind of the zone. So that'd be site number two. And then the third site would be around the shoulder region, kind of like anterior shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And into the armpit, basically, would be the next areas. And then from there, the abdomen. So we'd be above the navel, basically. So if you find your navel and then you go kind of 3-4 finger widths above the navel, that's a good area. Typically, the work we do there is a little bit deeper than the dermal, but still dermal is effective there too. And then we would go from there to the inguinal creases, which is the hip area that we had already described, and then finally the backs of the knees. The back of the knee actually has some lymph nodes there that are pretty much, you can palpate them. Maybe not quite as easy to find as the ones in the hips, but you would approach your self lymphatic work in that order with better success based on how fluid dynamics work in the direction of fluid flow. So that could mean a number of different things. On the joint mobility end of things, I will sometimes create a little joint mobility routine for people that need better lymphatic flow. So that would start up at the clavicles with like shoulder camshafts. We've got a mobility drill that is all about moving the scapula, but it's close enough. You're going to get movement up in the region of like the clavicle. And so you might start there with some motor control work for the scaps. Then you go up to the neck and the jaw, and we've got different mobility drills that we do there, a whole series of cervical mobility drills, even the jaw mobility drills where you're moving your jaw in different directions, gliding it side to side, forward, backwards, circles, all this stuff. And from there, we would move to more of like the anterior shoulder area. So we might be doing some like shoulder circle work there. And then we move down to the abdomen, where maybe now we're doing some diaphragm mobilizations. I know that our students that listen to this are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, people who take our courses are like, we talk about this stuff so much and it becomes so systematic in our thought process. Like, they're checking this off as they go. I don't expect our listeners that have not been with us as long on the podcast or have taken the courses might be like, what the heck's a shoulder camshaft? What's a diaphragm stretch? You can find all this stuff on our YouTube channel. The diaphragm stretch is a breathing drill that is good for mobilizing the diaphragm. And it is the diaphragm is another structure we could talk about here for being involved in lymph, right? Because it's the main muscle for breathing. So mobilizing the diaphragm is going to help people breathe better, but also mobilizing the connective tissues near that area, that zone above the navel, can be quite good. We might do some lumbar mobility for that too. We've got a whole series of lumbar mobility drills, front circles, back circles, lateral glides. Same idea with the hips, moving down to the hips. We've got a whole series of hip mobility drills, and then we've got several different knee mobility drills that we like. So you get the idea.
Yeah.
You can use isolated joint mobility like we love to use for other reasons, but you can put it together in a routine, and going through it in this order is really useful. That can be good, and you can even combine that with sensory stimulus at those same sites. So if you have like a little vibration tool or a percussion tool, those things can be quite useful. Again, starting up above the clavicles, maybe 20 seconds of stimulus in each of the zones on each side of the body, following up with movement. That's a good way to go.
So when you sent me that lymph kind of technique,
Yeah.
the guy followed that order
Yeah.
to a T, and basically all it was just kind of patting those areas
Yep.
and
You don't
then
even need
moving
a
on to the
tool.
next one. And so
Make
I
your
guess
own percussion.
yeah. And so I guess I'm curious, like, you mentioned doing more like mobility exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because we're increasing circulation and movement? Like, is it more effective than just like doing that
The
manual
padding.
percussion
Yeah.
padding?
So my
Or
answer is I just don't know.
yeah.
I've tried to figure this out over the years. What's better?
Hmm.
Is it the movement? Is it the sensory? Is it both? It seems to have some very individualized components to it. And so it's following the theory. We technically want both. I think both combined in the same routine can be good. Just like we said, movement plus breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Doing some breathing work like those diaphragm stretches, like CO2 tolerance work in combination with the joint mobility or in combination with the sensory work, it's effective. Which is better? I don't know. And it's very positional, like positionally specific for different individuals. Like for me, I do exceptionally well working up by the thoracic ducts, which are the ducts we're interested in near the clavicle. And I do really, really well with the cervical ones. As far as the other locations, I don't notice as much, right? And so it just it depends, I think, on the individual for sure.
Yeah, that
Yep.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Much like our neuro techniques, it's very
Yeah,
specific, right? Very context specific.
for
Can I
sure.
ask you real
Yeah.
quick, when you say I notice it helps, it works here more than there, what are you noticing?
Okay, so it's a good point. When I'm doing lymph work, I have a goal, a very specific goal. So, for example, the last time that I was doing lymph work was because of pain. Okay, so this is a good time to tell a quick story. Last summer, those who have been listening know that I had really bad symptoms on the left side of my body running down my leg. And it was, I just describe it as kind of sciatic in nature. It wasn't truly a sciatic, it wasn't truly down that distribution. But, anyways, the whole left side of my outside of my leg I had a lot of nervy sensation, a lot of burning, tingling, lots of pain. And it was a different type of pain than most people experience. So, like, I was not able to replicate it with a specific movement. So it wasn't like, hey, watch what happens when I abduct my hip and, abduct and flex it. Oh, ouch, there's the pinch. It wasn't that type of pain. Okay. It wasn't like position specific like that. It was more like, oh my gosh, this sucks all the time. And I can't pinpoint it. I can't just take my finger and go right there. Like, yes, I can. It hurts right there, but it also is causing me all this radiating discomfort all over my leg. Right. And so it's kind of a different kind of pain presentation. And long story short, if you've heard the story that I talked about at one point on the podcast, it was not an injury event pain. It was really, really significant pain that even kept me from walking at times. And it was all related to an inflammatory response that my body was having because of mold toxicity. And the mold toxicity over time, because this is something that we were dealing with for several years, had caused me to have gut issues. I developed a mild gluten sensitivity. I developed an infection in my gut, as well as just kind of overall digestive, disturbance, sensitivities that I didn't have before, including leaky gut. So this manifested itself and presented itself as this nasty pain. down my left leg. So nothing was working. I explained the story. I think in our January episode, my neuro tools weren't hacking it. That's very rare. And so when that happens, it's like, oh boy, what health problem is this? Because usually we can at least find a result relatively fast. My nerve glides weren't working, even though it felt like I needed them, like I had nerve irritation. And as I started to make progress on my gut health, that's when I was able to start, fixing the pain. But the tool that I ended up using that was giving me at least temporary relief so that I could go on with my day was lymphatics. Because my day would start and I'd roll out of bed and I'd be trashed right away. And I would go downstairs, and before I did anything, I would lay on my gym floor with my feet elevated on my bench. And I would take a kettlebell, kind of a light kettlebell. I think it was like maybe 15, 20 pounds. And I would place it on the thoracic ducts or the thoracic duct on my left side. Okay. Meaning I took the kettlebell and I put it on it's like just below my clavicle on my left pec. But I sort of would like wiggle the kettlebell around until it sort of found a home resting in the groove between what would be my pec, clavicle, and anterior deltoid.
Yeah,
there's kind of like a depression.
Yep, there's a little dip there.
Yeah, and that pressure feels good when you find it. So the kettlebell would be pressing into that area and kind of like also falling off my body, so like tractioning the skin away from my midline, and I would hold it with my hand to make sure that it didn't actually fall off, but it was this pressure plus traction on my left side. And while that pressure was there, I would also do some breathing work. So I did some diaphragm stretches. And then I have a handheld vibration device that I would work on the lymph area, the lymph node area on my neck. So like right under the corner of the jaw. So I would do this all at once, kind of just going back and forth. And this was a way to mobilize lymph throughout the body. And it really helped me a lot. I would immediately get up and I would be able to walk. And I'd be able to go about my day. My pain would drastically reduce. So, it'd be like go from like a chronic 7 or an 8 down to a 1. And I'd be able to, I'd get this result for several hours until things kind of came back to what they were before. And then at some point, I would also do that routine in the afternoon. But it was super helpful. Very, very helpful. It did not fix what was the underlying root cause of the problem, but it was just one of those times where I was leaning on that tool to provide me enough result to just get some relief and feel better. And it was quite useful. And so I should describe the kettlebell on the chest a little bit, because the side matters. So one of the things our listeners can do is look up one of the lymphatic drainage maps, and you'll see an image of the body that is essentially sliced down the middle. And what you'll see is that usually these images will show what is the right and left thoracic ducts. Okay. And this is where all fluid eventually re-enters circulation through these ducts up at the clavicles, which is why it's such an important area in our lymph techniques. And so by putting the kettlebell on the left side, if you were to look at one of the images, you'll see that the left thoracic duct is responsible for drainage for most of the body. So whole left side of the body, head to toe, also the right leg. And then the right side, the right thoracic duct, is responsible for, it's a smaller duct. And so it's responsible for the right arm, the right side of the thorax, and even the right side of the face and neck. So this is very important to know, because if you're going to use one of like a technique like I described with pressure on the clavicle, you have to have a goal. And so for me, my goal was pain relief on the left side of my body. So therefore, I'm not going to go and put the kettlebell on the right duct. I'm going to put it on the left. But let's say I had a goal of pain relief on my right leg. Well, I would still put the kettlebell on the left duct because of the way this is organized, with most of the body draining to the left thoracic duct. So knowing that is quite interesting. If you had an injury to the right side of your face, right, where you had visible swelling or something on the right side of your face, and your goal was to deal with the right side of the face, or maybe you had fluid in your ear on the right side and you wanted to promote movement of fluid in the ear canal, you were feeling, you had fluid there. Well, then you would be doing your techniques on the right side for the right duct, right? So that's an important piece to know. And the pressure on the ducts, though, that area seems to work pretty well. That can be done manually. Someone can press on it for you. But the cool thing is it's pretty accessible. I just take the kettlebell and usually wrap it in like a towel, and then use that as the pressure. You can also use sandbags, which is great. I just don't have any. But if you had a sandbag that was heavy enough, that would be nice. You wouldn't even
I'm
have to.
shocked you don't have sandbags.
Me
that
too.
Seems like a real tailor tool.
Yeah, I will eventually. I'd like to get some heavy sandbags. Maybe one of those, like the med balls that are heavy. I'd like to throw those things around outside. And yeah. Right now, I'm sort of maxed out on space for my home gym. But once
I get it, dude. I think that's the main pain of building a home gym.
Eventually, when we find our next place will be a home that we'll buy, and that'll be, I'll be thinking about some stuff like that for sure.
Oh man, I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
So back to lymphatics. You also mentioned something to me at the time. You were like, sometimes you'll feel lousy first before you feel better when you do these mobilization techniques. What's up with that?
So it is possible when you start to do lymphatic work to have like an acute response where the body is responding to what is essentially detox. It's becoming maybe a little overwhelmed, and sometimes we have negative symptoms like that. It's kind of like for me when I made changes to my diet, and then I was taking a lot of supplements that were sort of encouraging my body to do more detox. I actually felt lousy at times as my body was going through that process. That same idea can happen sometimes with lymphatic work. It's not all the time, and I wouldn't even call it that common. Usually the body can handle it. But if you're somebody that's been in a sympathetic state for a very long time, maybe you have other metabolic, concerns that you're working through, and you start all of a sudden pressing the right button to get your lymph system to mobilize more, then you absolutely could feel lousy. It's usually pretty short-lived. It's pretty short-lived, and then it typically, the more you get a good response and the body kind of adapts, and then it's gone. You don't feel it. But you could even get a skin rash, stuff like that can happen. Headache, dizziness, skin rash, nausea, stuff like that.
So this is sort of the opposite of a lot of our neuro tools, where you kind of encourage us to follow how we feel. Like if we feel better, that's usually a good sign. If we feel worse, that's usually a bad sign. Like listen to that. This is that sort of counterintuitive exception to that rule, it seems.
Yeah, it's something good to know about because it is possible.
Yeah.
And technically when you're having that response, you just kind of go, oh, okay, that's the response. I get why it's happening, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I will say this, it also brings up a good point. You can assess and reassess your response and even the location of the lymph work that you're doing the same way we would with the other neuro work. So testing range of motion is actually a really useful tool. Remember that global stagnation of the lymph system generally causes feelings of tightness and can restrict range of motion. So when you start doing lymphatic work, like for me, pressing on the left side duct, right, and spending some time there with vibration on, my neck and doing some diaphragm stretches, I would stand up and I would retest, and I would find, oh, my rotation's better, my hips feel looser, my pain has decreased. I'm doing good with this technique. Like, I am being accurate, and my body is responding positively to it. And you can do the same thing with, if you're using percussion or vibration at those different lymphatic node areas, you might find that working on one area, if you're testing range of motion as you apply the stimulus, you might find one is more productive for you than another. So that's, it's worth assessing how your body's responding. I will tell you that, like, the direct dermal level work around lymph nodes can actually be very precise. So, it's kind of like, there's kind of two ways to approach it. There's sort of the throw all the darts at the dartboard, hope something sticks, which is
Mm-hmm.
perfectly fine because a lot of the time you're going to get a reasonable result. But sometimes you have to be more specific, and you can actually pressure check these areas near lymph nodes where you take your fingers, you press in, not super hard, we're still dermal level, but you can actually drag the skin in 8 different directions of the compass, and you can test which one seems to give you the best result in terms of range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you drag the skin in a certain direction and you're holding that pressure and you notice, oh, my jaw feels looser, my neck feels looser. Oh, that's weird. All of a sudden I'm breathing a little better, like my sinuses opened up. Well, you just found a very position specific thing that's going to help you do better work at that zone. So people with manual therapy skills, they can approach it in a much more targeted way.
That's so interesting because it's like we've talked about this, but not at the lymph
Mhm.
node areas.
Oh, exactly. It's the same thing I talk about with, same thing I talk about with scars,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you don't need a scar for this technique to be useful. Sometimes we do it for other reasons too. You can pressure check nerves, right? You can pressure check any area of the skin that you want, scar or not, but it's very effective for finding the right directional, kind of finding the directionality of a scar, essentially the direction your nervous system likes the most,
Mm-hmm.
and also doesn't like, which is very useful at times. Figuring out that, hey, don't drag the skin in that direction because that is perceived as threatening for some reason, which it brings a whole nother level of accuracy and precision to the manual work that we do. And it's why you can't actually trust a general approach with manual therapy when you have a specific problem. You can't just move the tissue in all the directions possible. It's not that simple, and the nervous system doesn't necessarily accept it. And so that's why testing is so important when you're trying to get more thorough.
This may also be a good reason to tell someone not to buy an expensive vibration mat because
Yep.
maybe that's a good thing. Generally, I'm just thinking like everything in your body is kind of vibrating and moving, but that lack of precision could also work against you, right? Like parts of your body might not like that frequency of vibration or that
Totally. I mean,
intensity of vibration.
this is the whole thing. Like, people ask me about these vibration plates all the time. It's a This is how it works with marketing, and this is how it works with products. See, humans are suckers for intrinsic motivation. So the
Mhm.
more you feel something, the more you think it's doing. That's how we think. Okay. And so something like a vibration plate is very intense. You're going to feel the stimulus through your whole body, and it makes you think, oh, this must be doing more because I feel it more. It doesn't always work that way. And then, of course, there's always a dosage concern too. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying people are going to go out there and start getting hurt from vibration plates, but it's just not accurate work, right? And so if you're looking for that global stimulus and you test it and you feel good from it, by all means, have at it.
Yeah.
There could be value there for threat reduction for sure, but for targeted work, we have to get more targeted. We have to test and respect what the nervous system is showing us. So yeah, I don't think you don't have to go out and buy an expensive vibration plate to get started on mobilizing your lymph system. Remember, the most important things, you have to combine breathing with movement. That is step number one. If you want to get more targeted, you combine breathing with movement of the right body areas in the right order. And you can then add the sensory part to that too, where you're also applying the vibration or the percussion or whatever it is that you like to those same areas. And depending on your goals, if you have side of the body goals, right sided versus left sided, I just told you the key factor there. As far as beginning with the thoracic ducts, left thoracic duct for most of the body, right thoracic duct for right side of the thorax, right side of the face, neck, and right arm. So I'll to be honest with you, you don't need to know much more than that. And there's so much there that as far as I'm concerned and the type of work that I do with people, I usually don't need to even think beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's super fascinating. I do feel like you were saying it's becoming popular. I haven't seen that. This is all like new territory for me. So super.
Isn't that funny when I say
yeah.
something's becoming popular? It's literally because of that stupid algorithm tricking me into thinking that everybody's seeing the same stuff that I am.
but certain people are, right?
Yeah, certain people are.
Follow the same things you do. Yeah, but we're all in silos. Eventually, we're all going to be in different realities, perfectly suited to our own interests.
Man, it goes to show you how I think about this sometimes. It's like how scary if you're spending a lot of time on social media, like how your life is, or in your day and your life is being built around what you're being seen in a very controlled environment.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's really worthwhile sometimes to sit down with people and just like talk about the topics. Like, what are you hearing about?
Mm-hmm.
Because you'd be shocked how different the emphasis is on different news stories, or whether they're even being talked about at all in different circles. And it's like, man, we gotta figure that out. But that's a topic for a different podcast, I think.
Yeah.
Nice. Any final thoughts?
No, I think we got it, man. That was, I'm glad we circled back and finally got this one in. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something about the lymphatic system and that you can try some of the tactics that we described. If you want to learn more about the nervous system and those fundamental concepts that we're always coming back to, remember that you can still watch the replay of my free neuro masterclass. So really nice compliment to the podcast, especially if you've been starting to listen more to the episodes. It gets pretty complex here, right? We're going into a lot of, really interesting topics and going quite deep. It's very complimentary to watch the free masterclass because you will get the fundamental educational concepts that are so important, like the threat bucket, like Neuro 101, where does voluntary movement come from? And then you'll get a real-time experience where you actually get to try some neuro drills and assess and reassess and see how your body responds, which is really the key to all of this, is learning how to listen to your body. So make sure that you hit up the show notes. You'll find a link and you can still watch the free replay. So thank you guys so much for listening and for your support on the podcast. We'll be back soon.